Okay, so before we begin, I would just like to state for the record that today is May 4th, 2022, and my name is Ben Bauman. I'm speaking via phone with James Monk, who is in Springfield, Illinois, and we are doing an interview for the Indiana Legislative Oral History Initiative. So just starting off, when and where were you born?
I was born October 5th, 1947 in Sullivan, Indiana.
What were your parents' names?
My father's name was Lyman Monk.
Okay.
And my mother's name was Charlotte Monk, and her maiden name was Ellingsworth.
Okay. And when did your family first move to Indiana?
Well, both sides of my family were from Indiana for quite some time, so that's probably back maybe decades before I was born.
Sure. Okay. And what were your parents' occupations?
My father was a foreman at a gravel pit, and my mother was a registered nurse.
Did you have any siblings growing up?
I did. I have two sisters, younger.
And how would you describe your childhood overall?
Well, I was, as I told you, I was born in Sullivan, Indiana, which is the county seat of Sullivan County. It's a town of about 5,000 people. But I actually was raised in a little town about 8 miles west of there called Graysville, which was about 100 people.
Wow.
And so, it was just I lived in the little town. I didn't live on a farm or anything, but it was a very small town, typical small town existence, and so I lived there in that house in Graysville, Indiana, until I left to get married, actually.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Interesting. And who would you say were the most influential people in your childhood?
Well, my parents, obviously, but I had some teachers, especially one teacher that I have always thought of as my favorite teacher and most influential, and that was my first grade teacher, Julia Burnett.
Oh.
She was also my dad's teacher when he was in grade school.
Oh, okay.
She was in Graysville. There was actually, when I was growing up, first there was actually a high school, junior high, and elementary, all in one building in the little town, and then between my 8th grade year and my freshman year of high school, they closed the high school and consolidated it with Sullivan. So I went to high school in Sullivan, but I went to grade school and junior high in Graysville.
Wow, okay. Interesting. Now, what did you know about your family's political views when you were growing up?
My parents weren't very political. I mean, my dad, we talked, all of us talked about, current affairs and things like that. My dad and mom were both Democrats, but typical Southern Indiana, relatively conservative Democrats.
Yeah.
And not overly political. I think my dad ran for the local school board once and lost by one vote. I think that was all the politics he wanted.
Okay.
Now, I did have my mother's father was really probably the most influential person for me in terms of politics.
Right.
He was very active. He was at first he was living in Kentucky, but when he retired and moved into Sullivan, he was very active in politics. I think he was a precinct committeeman, and I used to go when I was younger. I used to go with him to political events like fundraisers and stuff like that. So that's really where I really got more interested in politics than my parents had ever been, was through my grandfather.
Sure, okay. So what schools did you attend growing up?
Well, I went to high school, as I said. I went to high school and graduated from Sullivan High School.
Yeah. Okay.
I went to elementary school and junior high were Graysville schools. And then I went to college after graduating from Sullivan High School. I lived at home and went my first year to Indiana State University in Terre Haute.
Oh, okay.
Commuted from Graysville to Terre Haute. That's about a half-hour drive.
Wow, all right.
So I went to college at Indiana State my freshman year, but I still lived at home.
Yeah, okay.
And then after that first year, I got married, and my wife and I moved to Terre Haute first and then on to Indianapolis. And so then I went to Indiana University's Indianapolis campus for 1 year, and then we moved to Bloomington, and I went and graduated from IU Bloomington after that.
Oh, okay. All right. So you bounced around a bit then.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. How would you describe your educational experiences then?
Excellent. I mean, they set me up for life. Going all the way back to the education I received at Graysville and that little kind of country school. Sullivan High School was a very good school for me. And then my college education, and especially at IU, was wonderful. So it really kind of set me up for life.
Yeah, okay. Did you have any favorite subjects in school at all, or?
Yeah, I was a social studies history kind of guy.
Okay.
And so my major in college was history.
Oh, really? Okay, that's cool. And were you involved in any like clubs or sports teams at all, or?
No, by the time I got to my sophomore year of college, I was already married and trying to support my wife and I. So
sure.
There wasn't time for those activities.
Yeah, I understand. So how did you view Indiana growing up then, all the way up to college and stuff? Did you kind of understand like where Indiana's place was in the U.S. in terms of like culture or whatever?
Sure. Yeah, I love Indiana. I loved it, love it still. And I had really good understanding, having grown up there and been aware of what was going on culturally and politically.
Yeah.
Had a pretty good understanding of it, and and I was very comfortable living in Indiana. But I didn't. After I graduated from college, I moved to Florida.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Well, I got a degree from IU, and included in that was a teaching certification.
Yeah.
So that had always been my goal, was to be a teacher.
Oh, okay, sure.
So I got it, but at that point in time, there weren't very many teaching jobs available in Indiana.
Oh, okay.
So I had a brother-in-law who lived in South Florida in the Fort Lauderdale area.
Yeah.
And so I went down there and did some interviews in that area for a teaching job, and got a job teaching in the Fort Lauderdale area.
Oh, cool. Okay.
My wife and I then moved from Bloomington after graduation. We moved from Bloomington to South Florida and lived there for 7 years.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And thinking about to your college experiences again, real quick, did your awareness of politics change much in college, or?
Yeah, I would say I was already very aware of politics. I had been kind of a political. The bug kind of bit me pretty young through my grandfather.
Oh, okay,
but
sure.
I got to college. It was right in the middle of the whole Vietnam War situation.
Yeah.
And that, Indiana at Bloomington was a real hotbed of activity in terms of anti-war
sure.
movement. So, yeah, I'd say my awareness was very much heightened. And then, where I really kind of shifted gears politically and really got into serious politics was in 1968, when Lyndon Johnson decided not to run for re-election, and Bobby Kennedy came to Indiana to run in the Indiana primary. I was all in. I got all in for Bobby Kennedy. I walked precincts. I did all kinds of stuff in that campaign, and actually wound up working a precinct in Smithville on election day.
Okay.
In that primary. So that was where I really went from having an interest in politics to being very actively involved in politics.
Right.
And that was when I was 21, and I've been at it now for well over 50 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, do you have any children?
Yes, I have two children. Actually, I had three. One child died in 2 months, but I have two children. One is actually now living back in South Florida. He's a foreign language teacher and assistant administrator at a private academy in Miami.
Oh, okay, interesting.
And my other son lives here in Springfield, and he works for Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, cool.
And then I have, I'll get to that later, but I have two stepchildren also from a second marriage.
Okay.
My first wife passed away from breast cancer, and then I remarried, and I have two stepchildren from that marriage.
Okay, sure.
My stepdaughter lives in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico.
Wow.
And my stepson lives here in Springfield.
Interesting. Okay. Now, thinking about when you started to get involved in politics, what kind of shaped your political outlook?
Well, I think, as I said, my grandfather being a Democrat, essentially what I call a Southern Indiana Democrat.
Yeah.
That really was the beginning of to shape my
Okay.
political philosophy. And then my experience in the Bobby Kennedy campaign, and my own personal experience later on. I think those are the things that really shaped my political philosophy through the years.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So when did you decide to run for the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, like I say, I was in Florida teaching high school.
Right.
Social history, government, leadership, all that kind of stuff. But I was also holding down 2 or 3 part-time jobs all the time, because back then, and probably even still today, you couldn't really make a living and support a family very well on a teacher salary.
Okay.
So I decided that I love teaching. I'd still be teaching today if I could have made a living at it.
Yeah.
I decided I needed to do something else to move forward with my life in terms of financial stability. So I decided to go to law school.
Okay.
So I went to law school at night while I was teaching.
Okay, sure.
And working other jobs.
Wow.
Busy.
Busy.
It was a very busy time.
Yeah. Jeez.
So I went to law school. I taught and lived in the Fort Lauderdale area. So I went to law school. The University of Miami in Coral Gables had a night law school program, and so I got into that program and went to law school there for 3 years while I was teaching. I'd teach, and then I'd drive to Miami at night, 3 or 4 nights a week to go to school.
Yeah.
But the problem arose that a new dean of the law school came in and changed essentially the policy that you couldn't graduate just going to law school at night. You had to do 1 year of full-time day studies, and I couldn't do that. In Miami, I was hard enough doing what I was doing, but I would have to do that. I would have to quit my teaching job.
Yeah.
And so that was not going to work. So I was 2/3 of the way through law school, but I wasn't going to be able to finish at Miami. So what I decided to do was to leave teaching, move to Gainesville, Florida, and finish my law school at the University of Florida in Gainesville. So that's what I did.
Okay. Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, and then while I was at Gainesville, we decided we wanted to eventually move back to Indiana. So as soon as, in fact, almost the day I graduated from law school in the morning, we started back home to Indiana in the afternoon. And so that's what I did I had already flown to Indiana and taken the Indiana bar and passed it. So I was already all set up to practice law in Indiana. So we moved back to Sullivan, our little hometown there, and I set up a law practice there.
No, okay, sure.
Okay, so I'm stay with me. I'm getting there.
Yep. No, I understand. Yeah.
So I set up a law practice in with a fellow. It wasn't a partnership or anything, but I practiced law in the same office as an established lawyer there in town. And one of the things that was kind of going on at the time was people were a little upset at the local county prosecutor. They didn't think he was really doing the job that they wanted him to do.
Right.
So the guy that I was working with and I talked, and he said, why don't you run for prosecutor? Not only, even if you don't win the election, it'll help you get known better, although you're pretty well known already. It'll help you get known better, and it'll give you some good publicity. So I decided to do that. So I filed petitions and announced to run for prosecutor against the incumbent prosecutor, who actually I had gone to school with and was kind of a friend of mine in the school days, but never really a close friend. But anyway, so I ran for prosecutor. I mean, in Sullivan County at that time, probably not now, but in Sullivan County at that time, the election was the Democratic primary. I mean, there weren't very many Republicans in Sullivan County at that time.
Yeah.
So I challenged him in the Democratic primary and beat him.
Interesting.
Upset the incumbent prosecutor and got the Democratic nomination. Didn't even have an opponent in the fall. So
wow.
That's how I got elected prosecutor. This was in 1978. I think the election was less than a year after I had moved back to Indiana. The November election was less than a year after I moved back to Indiana in December of the year before. So anyway, there I was, elected prosecutor.
Wow, okay.
So I served as county prosecutor for 4 years. But I liked the job. It was not, prosecuting is not everybody's cup of tea, but I liked it. I didn't love it, but I liked it. But in the meantime, what was going on at the state level was redistricting. That would have been the redistricting from the 1980 census. And when they drew the boundaries, the legislative boundaries from that redistricting process, they created a district that I thought was just perfect for me, a Senate district that I thought was just perfect for me because the district, the 39th district, ran from downtown Terre Haute all the way to past Vincennes, almost to Princeton, just right down the side of the state.
Okay.
And right in the middle of that district geographically was Sullivan, where I was at.
Yeah.
So I talked to a lot of the folks that I knew politically. I knew a few people at the state level, not many, but I talked to them. But I talked mainly to the local folks that I knew in Sullivan County, and also I knew some people by that time in Knox County, where Vincennes is, and they encouraged me to go for it. The problem was there was an incumbent state senator who lived actually south of Vincennes. He was in the new district. He would have been at the far south of that new district. But he was talking about running for re-election in this new district that I was thinking about. Well, he decided eventually, was persuaded eventually to run for the House of Representatives instead.
Yeah.
And he did. He ran for the House, got elected. But anyway, that left the Democratic primary in that new district was just me. So I got that nomination. There was a Republican candidate from Vincennes, but I beat him in the general election pretty handily. That's how I got elected to the Indiana Senate in 1982.
Right. Wow. Okay.
And then I got reelected in 1986.
Yeah. All right. And so, What would you say was like your main campaign strategy then?
Well, my main campaign strategy was simply to in that primary where I beat the incumbent prosecutor. Yeah. What I was known for was walking every precinct in the county, and that was it was a May primary, so most of that walking was done in the late winter, early spring, including a couple of big snowstorms. And even after several years, when I was running for re-election in 1986, I still had people tell me, "I remember you ran for prosecutor. You came out and there was 14 inches of snow, and you were out walking in that snow campaigning." So, I mean, it's just a lot of. I mean, I'm kind of old school when it comes to campaigns.
Yeah.
No substitute for shoe leather.
Sure.
And meet people, because it'll help you in that election, and it'll help you down the road too.
Yeah. So that was, I guess,
in terms of what I was trying to accomplish, other than getting myself elected, I was trying to get some new blood into the system, representing our area. That area over there is a coal area. It was probably not anymore, but it was a coal area.
Yeah.
And so when I got to the General Assembly to represent that area well, I concentrated on utility issues and stuff like that that had a direct relationship to coal.
Right.
The United Mine Workers were very supportive of my candidacy, and so I was, and I had done quite a bit of work, black lung work in my law practice, representing individual miners. So that was one of my main concerns, was having somebody who had actually some knowledge of, some personal knowledge of, and feeling for some of the coal mining issues in our district.
Sure. Okay. And so, I guess walking door to door, is that something you did then for all your campaigns?
Yeah, I try. I mean, the problem was I ran 6 times. I ran county primaries, general elections.
Yeah.
I ran for election 6 times. I only had an opponent twice.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
The first time, and then that first election to the Senate. Every other election I ran unopposed, so I still got out and went to all kinds of events and walked a little bit, but yeah, definitely in those 2 elections where I had opponents, walking door to door was really the whole key.
Yeah. Did you have any kind of like funny or strange experiences walking door to door? Because I imagine whenever someone running for office does that, you could get all sorts of experiences, which could be unique.
Yeah. Well, I did. There's some stories, but I had this one little town called Paxton, which is south of Sullivan, when I was running for prosecutor, and it was like the snow and all that. Like I said, I was going door to door in Paxton, which only took about 2 hours because it's not a very big place.
Right.
I was going door to door in Paxton, and I go up to this one house, and I start to open the gate to go into the yard, and these dogs come at me. I mean, like 3 dogs, and I mean they were serious dogs. So I quickly shut the gate and stayed outside the gate, away from the dogs, and I waited to see if they would go, away or calm down or something. And they didn't. So I said, I'm not going to get chewed up over this one house.
Right.
I went on to the next house and the next house after that. And then on election night, I wound up losing Paxton by 3 votes.
Oh my gosh.
And I told everybody, I said, damn, if I had just got into that one house, I might have won Paxton.
That's right. Yeah. Got to risk it, I guess. Yeah.
I guess, I don't know.
That's pretty wild.
Well, they might have been Republicans. They wouldn't even be voting for my primary anyway.
True. Yeah. Never know. Yeah.
So that's I served in the Senate and got elected twice and served 7 years in the Senate, and then left the Senate to be appointed chairman of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission that regulates utilities.
Right. Okay. And what did you think of the election process for the General Assembly and stuff? Did it seem like a pretty efficient process? And
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting contrast with what I found when I got to Illinois.
okay,
Because Illinois does redistricting different than Indiana.
okay,
Illinois redistricts Senate and House districts are like one Senate district is made up of two House districts.
okay.
So 59. There's 118 House districts and 59 Senate districts. So every district is the same. It just has one senator and two House members.
Okay.
In Indiana, I mean, when I was in the Senate, I had four House members who were in my district.
Wow.
Indiana redistricts the Senate districts and the House districts separately.
Yeah.
It's not like in Illinois. It's a very smooth map.
Yeah.
You always know there's going to be two House members in every Senate district. In Indiana, it's just a matter of how it falls.
Right.
My district ran all the way from Terre Haute almost to Princeton, and in that 4-county district, I had 4 different House members who served in that district.
Wow. Yeah.
I thought that was a good approach.
Right.
I'm sure one's better than the other. It did strike me when I got over here and saw this that it was so how different it was in terms of the redistricting process.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And what was your reaction when you found out that you won your election for the General Assembly?
Oh, I was pretty excited. I was pretty excited. I thought it was, it was something I had never, when I was, going to school and teaching and all that, it wasn't something that I had ever thought about.
Yeah.
I didn't really even think about that until I got elected. First time I got elected to the prosecutor's job. That's when I thought, well, maybe that would be a next step. And the prosecutor's job was not easy. All things considered, one of the toughest parts of it was a small town part-time county prosecutor, because I was part-time in the small counties. They're part-time prosecutors.
Right.
So part-time, and I still had my law practice too. But the thing is, when there are crimes committed that are relatively serious crimes, you want to be there in the jail doing the interviewing or supervising the interviewing so that nobody messes up, because you're the one that's going to have to eventually take that case to trial and try to get a conviction. So
right.
For 4 years there, it meant a lot of 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning calls to come to the jail. And so that was one of the main drawbacks to the prosecutor's job. So I'm not sure I would have run for re-election. I probably would have as prosecutor, but when the Senate opportunity presented itself, that looked like a much better option to me than staying in the prosecutor's office.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like there's a difference there, yeah. So, on your first day in office in the General Assembly, what were you thinking when you first entered the State House for that first day?
Well, it was kind of an interesting situation. The election was obviously the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, and I got elected, and everything was celebration and everything. And then about 2 days later, Governor Bob Orr discovered a $400 million deficit that he hadn't discovered before the election.
Oh my gosh! Okay.
Yeah. They 2 days after the election, they decided, oh, we've got a problem. We're going to have to have the General Assembly come in special session and
Wow.
Raise taxes to make up this $400 million deficit. So my first vote. So yeah, I got that notice like 2 days after the election or 3 days after the election that there was going to be a special session of the newly elected General Assembly. So I think it was probably 3 weeks after the election, I went to Indianapolis for my first time as a state senator, and the very first thing we did was vote on a tax increase in that special session. And I thought, wow, this is quite a start.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So then, then we had organization day after that, and then we started the regular session, and it was just really cool. I love the Capitol building. When my current wife and I got married, my second wife, we got married in the chapel in the state capitol.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so I love that building. It's a lot smaller than the one over here that I've been working in for almost 30 years. But it's a really neat building. I really always loved it.
Yeah.
And it was fun being there. It was fun being in the Senate. And I had some great friends. Bill McCarty from Anderson and I were seatmates.
Yeah, okay.
The whole time I was in the Senate, we were seatmates and good friends. And I had other good friends there. And actually, even though if you'll check the records, before I got elected in 1982, in the General Assembly before that,
yeah,
in the Senate, there were only 15 Democrats out of 50 senators. They didn't even have enough to break a quorum.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
when I got elected, we gained 3 seats, my seat and 2 other seats. So we got to 18, so we at least could break a quorum.
Yeah. Jeez.
And then during the time I was there, we kept gaining a seat here and a seat there. And the last General Assembly I served in, the one that was elected in 1988, I was reelected in 86. But the General Assembly that got elected in 1988, when Evan Bayh was elected for the first time, that General Assembly was 26-24 Republican.
Wow.
So from 35-15 to 26-24, and that was also the year of the first 50-50
Right.
House of Representatives.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we got very close. Now, after I left the Senate, it started going the other way. And now I think it's back to pretty much where it was before I ever got there.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Republicans and very few Democrats.
Yeah. True. What was it like working with House members during the 50-50 session?
Well, I only did that one year because
Right.
when Governor Bayh decided to appoint me to the Utility Commission,
Yeah.
he also wanted me to be sure and stay. He wanted to make that appointment after the General Assembly ended because I was going to carry some legislation for him, criminal law legislation, and stuff like that.
Right.
He wanted me to stay in the Senate until the end of the session, and then he would officially appoint me to the commission. So that's what happened. So that first year, that first session there in 1989, the first session of the 50-50 House and the 26-24 Senate, it was really bizarre, as you might expect.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what to do. I mean, there was no precedent whatsoever. They had no idea what to do over in the House, how to even get to a resolution. So they cobbled together a really weird arrangement where they would have alternating speakers on each day. The Democrat would be the speaker one day, and the Republican would be the speaker the next day. And then they had committees were equally numbered, and there were co-chairs of every committee. And it was just a really bizarre kind of setup, and it didn't work all that well, but at least it got us through. The problem that we had in the Senate was we thought an arrangement like that would probably nothing would get done in the House. Nothing would pass because everybody would be at loggerheads over it.
Right.
So what they did was they basically passed everything.
Wow.
I mean, we got a lot more bills passed in the House in that House than we'd ever had passed in the House in my other years there. So we had to work kind of overtime in the Senate to handle all that stuff.
Jeez. Okay.
Most of it was garbage.
Okay.
So we treated it as garbage. But that was the but that was the one thing most that I remember about that session was how we were just flooded with bills that they passed. They had kind of I guess they must have had a kind of an unspoken understanding of we'll let your bills through if you'll let ours through.
Yeah, I guess.
But that was very interesting. And then the day after that session ended in April, late April, I resigned from the Senate and was appointed to chair the Utility Commission.
Okay. Interesting. Wow. And so, when you first got involved in the General Assembly, did you have particular expectations about the process and how it would work?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't at that point one of those guys that goes by the chart on how a bill becomes law. I knew that how things work.
Right.
But it was interesting to see the dynamic when you had a long-standing leadership in the Senate. I mean, Bob Garton and Joe Harrison and those guys were there before I got there, and they were there a long time after I left.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see the dynamic of how that really strong leadership worked and how they dealt with guys like us who were in the minority. My experience with them, however, was kind of different than many of my colleagues in the Democratic caucus. And part of it is because I was and am a relatively conservative Democrat,
right?
Moderate Democrat, I would say, to say the least. I was able to kind of work with those guys on things, whereas some of my other more liberal colleagues, especially from Lake County and Marion County, would refuse to work with them. I was able to work with them on things over the years and gain a good relationship with them, and I think gain their trust, so that I wound up being, me and a couple of other guys from Southern Indiana wound up kind of being the Democrats who would work with the Republican leadership to get things actually done.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's interesting that they don't have over here in Illinois, they don't have a real important conference committee system over here like they do in Indiana.
Okay.
And I wound up being the Democrat senator on a lot of conference committees on important bills because the Garton and Harrison and those guys knew they could trust me to do what should be done and not play games with important bills.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. And so how did you kind of learn the ins and outs of the General Assembly then? Was it just kind of interacting with people regularly? And
Yeah. I mean, one of the best things and along those lines was my Senate caucus leader was Frank O'Bannon.
Yeah.
I love Frank O'Bannon. He was just a wonderful person and a really good leader. And I learned so much from him on how to deal with people, how to work through the process. Just a wonderful, wonderful person. Loved him.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. And how did you keep track of like the needs and wants of your constituents? What was your method for that?
It was tough. Like I said, when I was a prosecutor, I kept my law office because the prosecuting job was part-time. So I still had my law office while I was, as a prosecutor, and I just, continued practicing law while I was in the Senate.
Sure.
Because it's a part-time legislature. So my law office was kind of also my unofficial district office for my Senate district. So I had facilities and had, a setup there where people could get in touch with me and come and see me on constituent matters and stuff like that. So that was helpful. And then during the session, one good thing about having 4 House members in your district, you get a good crowds for Saturday morning, town hall type things.
Right.
So we used to do that. Actually, one of my House members was John Gregg, from Sanborn, Indiana, who later became Speaker of the House, and almost governor of Indiana.
Yeah.
So anyway, usually every Saturday morning during session, me as the senator and one or two or three of the House members would do town hall type meetings in places in our district. Sometimes an early one, say in Sullivan, and a later one, say in Vincent, or something like that. So every Saturday morning, you'd come home from the General Assembly on Thursday night or Friday night, and then every Saturday morning, you'd get to meet your constituents and listen to them and tell them what's going on and get questions and interact with the other House members and that type of thing. So I think that was really, really important. Part of the whole process to me was providing that kind of instant feedback, basically, to take back to the General Assembly the next week when you went back to Indianapolis.
Right. Okay, sure.
So we did that. I mean, we tried to do that, as many of those as we could, because we all found it really helpful to be able to know the reaction to some of the stuff we were actually doing in Indianapolis in basically real time.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you remember the first bill that you sponsored or authored in the General Assembly?
I was trying to think of that, and I don't. But the thing was, there weren't that many lawyers in my caucus.
Right.
There were only 18 of us, and there weren't that many lawyers, maybe 2 or 3. So I was, Frank O'Bannon named me to be the ranking Democrat, the ranking minority member of the Judiciary Committee. And so that was, and then he also, because I wanted to be involved in coal-related, utility-related issues, he also appointed me to the Commerce Committee and a couple of other relatively minor committees, but those were my 2 main committees, Judiciary and Commerce. And so it's probably the first set of bills I introduced were probably introduced along with the chairman of Judiciary, who at that time was Les Duval, who I actually succeeded at the Utility Commission. He left the Senate to go chair the Utility Commission, and then when Governor Bayh came along, he appointed me to replace Les at the commission.
Yeah.
So anyway, I would imagine the first bills that I introduced were introduced with Les and related to criminal law or civil law because of our positions on judiciary. I do remember probably the most important vote that I took my entire first year was a vote to establish the funding mechanism for the Hoosier Dome.
Oh, okay, yeah.
This was early 1983, and the state was kind of building the Hoosier Dome on spec.
Okay.
They didn't have tenants, they didn't have a team, nothing. Early in that session, they decided they wanted to go ahead with this project to build the Hoosier Dome, but they didn't have a secure source of funding.
Right.
So what was proposed, and the bill that passed that I voted for, and I think almost everybody else did too, was a bill to set up the hotel motel tax as a funding mechanism to pay for the Hoosier Dome.
Okay.
And so that was pretty early. So it was one of my first. It was one of my first big votes in the Senate was to vote to approve that funding mechanism for the Hoosier Dome.
Right.
And so it was kind of cool to do that, and then watch the Hoosier Dome be built, and then watch it all come to fruition when the Colts moved in 1984.
Yeah, true, definitely.
So yeah, people were getting a little nervous though, because we as the stadium got further and further along, and we still didn't have a major tenant, people were getting a little nervous about that vote.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But in the end, we were all surprised. In the end, that tax raised enough money to pay off the Hoosier Dome in half the time it was supposed to.
Wow.
And part of that's because Indianapolis became a big convention and area for visitors, and all of those visitors paid money into that tax.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But that was in 1983, and Indianapolis was kind of like just beginning to market itself as the sports capital of the country and all that. So the tourism wasn't quite up to what it later turned out to be at that point.
Right, okay. Now, how easy did you find it, like when it came to getting a bill passed? Did you often find that you had pretty good support for your bills, or was it ever challenging?
It was challenging, but you had to, and as I told others when they came after me, new legislators, there's just no substitute for working the bill.
Yeah.
You have to work the bill. It's not that you can't go into it thinking, well, this bill is such a good bill, it's going to stand on its own merits. That's just not the way the system works. And it's not just in Indiana. That's the nature of the legislative process. You have to work the bill. So that means you have to go talk to people. You have to get support not only among legislators but among lobbyists.
Right.
And and then once I became a lobbyist myself, that kind of thought process really governed a lot of what I did as a lobbyist, trying to get bills passed.
Yeah. Okay.
There's just no substitute. I know a lot of people would like there to be a substitute, but there's just no substitute for hard work to get the bill passed.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how often did you find that you had to get sort of bipartisan support for your bills? Was that something that you pretty much all the time had to do?
Being in the minority party the entire time, there was just no substitute. Rarely could you get a bill passed without at least tacit support of the leadership from the other side.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's why I worked really hard to try to develop a good relationship with the leadership from the other side, rather than adversarial.
Yeah, sure.
It's an interesting call that was made when I took the job. When I was at the commission in Indiana, and then I took this job, left the commission, took this job in Illinois, moved over to Illinois to establish an association of the electric companies over here, electric and gas companies. So I was like the founding president of that. But I knew maybe two legislators in all of Illinois. One's guys who were on the other side of the Wabash River from my district when I was in the legislature. I didn't know any of the leadership over here, and so I asked Bob Garton to call the Senate president, his counterpart in Illinois, and kind of introduce me, and he did.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I always was very indebted to Bob for doing that. And Bob and I had a really good relationship. Joe Harrison and I had a good relationship. But, in the end, they were the leaders of the Republican Party over there, and I was the Democratic senator, so there was only so much I could do.
Yeah, right, naturally. But would you say the atmosphere then between the different members of the General Assembly was pretty good overall when you served?
When I served, I would say it was outstanding compared to what it is today. I don't know anything. I don't know much except what I read and what I hear from my counterparts in the utility industry over in Indiana. But it's the same thing over here. It's just and in Congress, it's just a very toxic atmosphere now compared to what it was when I served. And I would absolutely not want to serve in a General Assembly either in Illinois or Indiana or in Congress under these conditions. It's just, the best part about when I served was the collegiality of the group. I mean, we were partisan, Republican, Democrat, but we all knew that we had a bigger purpose than just that. Today, I think that bigger purpose thing has gone out of people's sight.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that a lot now. At this point, sounds like that's a common analysis of today's situation.
Yeah, and it's a shame because it doesn't make things better. It makes things much, much worse.
Right.
For our constituents.
Yeah.
Not just us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a pretty bad situation in general.
Yeah.
Now, what were the differences between the House and Senate?
Well, I mean, that's a loaded question to ask either a House member.
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah.
I'm sure you're getting very interesting answers about that.
Yep.
The House. I had actually thought about running for the House at one point.
Okay.
I actually even down when I was, I think I got elected to my second term in the Senate. There were people who wanted me to run for Congress against John Myers.
Yeah.
And I said, no, first place, John's a friend. I wouldn't want to run against him personally. But in the second place, you couldn't pay me enough money to be a member of the House of Representatives in Washington.
Right.
And I said, and the reason for that is the same reason I wouldn't have wanted to be in the House in Indiana. The House is just too chaotic.
Okay.
And even, I'm sure it is now, but it was even more so back then. There doesn't seem to be enough focus among the members, and that's what I always liked about the Senate. Number one, is smaller, which I think helps in that regard. But number two, it seemed like both sides of the aisle over there in the Senate really had more focus on what their job was, what they were trying to accomplish individually and collectively. Much more focus, I thought, than I saw when I ventured over to the House and to see my friends over there.
Yeah, sure. Now,
it was just generally speaking, a more chaotic atmosphere.
Right, okay.
and the House members will probably say the reverse of that the Senate was boring and sleepy and nothing really exciting ever happened there. And I think it's just a different type of mentality that you have in the different chambers.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of I've heard those thoughts echoed, multiple times now, yeah.
Well, you have 100 members over there, and I mean that just multiplies the chaotic factor, I think.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah. What would you say in terms of influence? How influential was party leadership when it came to getting legislation passed?
Very. I mean, first of all, in your own party, you needed the support of your leadership.
Yeah.
Especially as a minority member. And then in the overall scheme of things, like I said before, it would be very difficult for a minority senator to get any kind of a controversial bill passed without the support of the other side leadership.
Yeah.
The overall leadership. And that's, I think, one of the things that differentiated the Senate from the House too. I think I wasn't in the House. I don't know. I don't have any stories about it, but I think it was much easier to kind of be a cowboy in the House and get something done on your own, because I don't think the leadership was nearly as tight over there as it was in the Senate.
Okay, so in the Senate it was pretty much like you play by their rules, kind of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and I don't know how it was when Bob Garden and Joe Harrison and those guys, Larry Borst and Maury Mills. I don't know how it was when they first got leadership, but by the time I got there, they had been in leadership for 8 to 10 years, and they had their game down. They had the way the Senate ran was very structured.
Yeah.
And, they stayed on for at least, I think, close to another 20 years after that.
Yeah.
I mean, they were in the control of the Senate for probably almost 30 years.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I guess Yeah, it would be kind of interesting then to expand on that a bit. Like, how would you describe some of the powers that Senate leadership or House leadership has, whether it's the heads of the entire chamber or just like the person in charge of a committee? Because I think a lot of people probably in the public don't understand like the complexities of leadership and their role in shaping what sort of gets passed or not.
I'll do a comparison with Illinois too, because I think it's instructive.
Yeah.
Over here, the committee chairs are appointed by the leadership, but the leadership, the Speaker and the President of the Senate, they call the shots in terms of committee, what gets out of committee.
Okay.
In Indiana, at least then, I don't know about now, but at least then, the leadership appointed the committee chairs, and the committee chairs really had pretty much unfettered say as to what bills were heard and what bills were voted on.
Yeah.
So the role of the committee chair over here is not nearly as powerful as it was in Indiana. Committee chairs, Maury Mills was chairman of the budget committee for 25, 30 years. And everything that came out of that committee was something Maury Mills let out of the committee.
Yeah.
There was no going over the head of the chairman.
Yeah.
It was and same where I was in judiciary, Les Duval, and then later Ed Pease. I was always the ranking minority member, but the committee chairs kind of were really powerful. I used to joke. Ed and I were good friends. He's from Terre Haute, or actually Brazil. But Ed Pease and I were good friends and have been for a long time. And Les Duval left, as I said, to go chair the Utility Commission, and Ed was appointed by Garden to be chair of the Judiciary Committee. And Ed's a very nice guy, and that first session that he was chair of the committee was terrible to be on that committee because he wanted to hear every bill. And I said, Ed, I know you want to be nice to people and you want to hear their bills, but my God, we would go in, we would have committee meetings before session, go to session, come back after session, and have committee meetings on into the evening just to hear all these bills. And I said, Ed, you sold your soul to get this job. Now use it. Tell some of these people you can't hear their bill.
Yeah.
Because we're spending hours and hours hearing bills that are never going anywhere.
Yeah. Because
you're trying to be nice.
Yeah, that's the interesting aspect of it, because it's I guess. So would you say like the main reason why like a committee chair or party leadership would dictate what bills are heard is to save time, but also to get rid of bills that they feel are just ridiculous, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a very effective and efficient way to run a committee process. It puts a lot of power in the hands of a chairman, but for the most part, I didn't have maybe a couple of people that I could say were not very up to the task, but for the most part, in the Senate, where I was in the Senate, the committee chairs were really pretty good chairmen. I mean, I disagree with them on a few things, but they would, for the most part, they didn't abuse the process like they could have, maybe.
Yeah. Did you ever witness like bills that you thought that should have been heard in a committee that were not?
Oh yeah, sure. Bills, mostly Democrat bills.
Yeah. Well, yeah, naturally, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder. I mean, do you think there's a way for that process to be improved where you can get legislation that should be heard even if it's coming from the opposite political party?
Yeah, I think. I mean, there are parliamentary ways to do that, but it all involves votes, and the votes are going to go the way the leadership wants them to go.
Right.
I think you could build some kind of mechanism in where a committee chair the committee chair's decision. It's like in the parliamentary process where you can vote a bill out of holding. If the bill's being held, you can actually the whole body, if the whole body can vote for it,
yeah.
I mean, they can actually vote it out of that holding. But maybe there needs to be a process like that in the committee process, which I don't. There wasn't when I was there, but it would have helped a couple of times to get some bills out that I thought needed to be heard but weren't being heard. But that was relatively rare.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Did you ever go against party leadership?
Oh yeah.
How'd that go?
Well, it wasn't so much going against party leadership as going against a big chunk of the caucus.
Okay.
Because a big chunk of my caucus, and Ed Pease as a Republican had the same problem with his caucus. A big chunk of my caucus was not philosophically, politically on the same wavelength as I was. And I'm talking mainly about the more liberal members from Lake County and Marion County, and that was those were Democrat strongholds. So that was a big, probably more than a majority of our caucus was from those two areas.
Yeah.
So small southern Indiana, relatively moderate to conservative guys like me weren't always on the same wavelength as those folks.
Right.
So, and that's actually was part of the genius I thought of Frank O'Bannon, was that being a southern Indiana guy and being a relatively moderate guy as a Democrat, he was able to kind of work around those issues a lot. But there were times when even he could work around an issue, and tempers would flare in the caucus because either I was going, myself and a couple of other guys from southern Indiana, we were going to vote with the Republicans on a bill that the liberal Democrats didn't want us to do. There were some moments there when tempers flared a little bit.
Yeah, I bet.
Situations like that. And Ed had the same problem. Ed Pease had the same problem on the Republican side because he was a pretty, I wouldn't say progressive, but he was a moderate Republican.
Right.
And some of the real more hardline Republicans in his caucus were not happy with some of his votes, and it got a little testy in there too, he told me.
Okay.
So I told Pease, I said, we should make our own caucus, you and I.
Now, how did your legislative service affect your family life?
Well, it was tough for me because I didn't stay in Indianapolis very often. I commuted back and forth to Sullivan, which is 100 miles.
Wow.
For 7 years, I commuted back most of the time, unless it was weather or something. I commuted back and forth to Sullivan because then the main reason was not only my family, but my law practice.
Yeah.
I had ongoing law practice, and so I would, if the General Assembly got out at adjourned at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, I could be home by 5:30, stop by my law office and pick up whatever work I needed to do from the law practice, take it home, do it at home, be with my family, and then the next morning on the way out of town to Indianapolis, I dropped off what I did the night before so that my assistant could work on it during the day while I was in Indianapolis. And so I did that for years.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it was tough, but at least I made up my mind when I ran for the job that I was not going to be staying in Indianapolis all week. I was going to be home every night if I could. Just because I had small kids and a wife and the law practice to take care of.
Yeah. Okay.
So I didn't go to all the parties.
Yeah, I guess not. You'd be missing those. Yeah.
I was driving from Greencastle to Terre Haute when they were going on.
Yeah. Now, how influential would you say lobbyists were in the General Assembly?
In Indiana, they were influential. But not anything like what I ran into here in Illinois.
Oh, okay.
I say that as I think a pretty influential lobbyist over here.
Oh, okay.
I'm retired now, but when I was head of the Association of all the electric and gas utilities
Yeah.
in the state. I was, I think, a pretty influential lobbyist. We got some, over my 27 years in that job, we got some very major energy legislation passed.
Yeah.
And so I had a hand in that. But the lobbyists that I remember most were the ones that were the most helpful.
Okay.
Like Ed Simcox of the electric utilities, Jim Bittinger of the gas utilities, Dick Good of the Justice Center for Justice on criminal law matters, Bobby Small, the same guy, same thing. Those guys, they were influential with me by being helpful, by being informative, by not taking a real hard line and simply trying to convince me. And that's the kind of lobbyist I tried to be.
Yeah.
Get your facts in order, get your proposal in order, and go sit down with the legislator and try to persuade them this is what ought to be done. And that's the way I was treated by those guys. And frankly, when somebody tried a real hard line, it was counterproductive.
Okay. So I guess if a lobbyist came off too strong, you'd kind of get the impression that they were not trustworthy or something.
Yeah, I mean, I have. It just gives you a bad vibe when somebody comes on with such a hard line.
Yeah, like a salesman or something.
Yeah, like a salesman. I don't react all that well to salesmen like that.
Let's see. So, do you think that campaign donations or gifts had much influence on politicians when you served?
Not in Indiana.
Okay.
Not when I served. It probably does now.
Okay.
It does over here in Illinois. It did right from the minute I got here. I realized that.
Okay.
In Illinois, campaign donations were a big factor. But I mean, I didn't personally do much along those lines because I really, like I said, I only got one time when I was my first election to the Senate. It was the only time I had an opponent, and the only time I actually needed any money.
Yeah.
And I didn't get, I think, of my grand total of spending that campaign was $10,000. And, I think the second time I got elected, I had no opponent in the primary and no opponent in the fall. I think I spent $100 to get elected.
Wow.
On postage to thank my precinct committeeman.
Wow. Yeah.
So, but in the more competitive districts, in the bigger city districts, yeah, I'm sure even then campaign contributions were effective, but just nothing in Indiana on the scale of what it is over here or was over here. Interesting.
Okay. How influential would you say gerrymandering was when you served?
Well, I'd say it's pretty influential. That's how I got there.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I mean, I didn't ask that it be gerrymandered that way, but
right.
when that district was devised with me right in the middle of it, I certainly benefited from it.
Okay.
Gerrymandering over here is an art.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely, and now it's so highly computerized. I mean, they can draw those districts. It's amazing what they can do with the computers in drawing districts now. So it's like everything else over here. It's much more politicized than it ever was in Indiana when I was there. But I haven't been in Indiana politics now for 30 years, so maybe it's changed. I'm sure it has, but I don't think there's any way it could change as much as it is here in Illinois.
Yeah. So do you think that there should be any like changes to mitigate, I guess, partisan gerrymandering at all, or do you think that the system is okay, just needs to be kind of put in the right hands? Or
yeah, I'm not a strong believer in the taking it out of the hands of the legislators. But
right.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends. And over here, we've had examples, good and bad, of leadership gerrymandering maps. So I think it depends a lot on the leadership, and frankly, I don't think the leadership in Indiana ever really did anything like I've seen over here in terms of gerrymandering.
Okay.
There was some shaping of districts to be more Republican, Democrat, or et cetera, but not like it is over here. Over here, it's an industry.
Yeah. So, based on your experiences overall in the General Assembly, what would you change about the legislative process?
Oh, wow. I can't. I think the legislative, the actual in the chamber type legislative process, I don't know that I have any really serious, significant changes there.
Okay.
Where the activity, I think you could really maybe tighten it up a little bit is in the committees.
Okay.
Make the committees a little more efficient, a little more effective. But overall, I think the process works. I mean, it's not a beautiful process. It's like we say over here, it's making sausage, but
yeah,
it works.
Sure. Let's see. What would you say was the most controversial legislative issue or issues when you served in the General Assembly?
Well, the most controversial the whole time I was there, and it wasn't resolved until after I left, was gambling.
Okay, yeah.
It was, started out, when I first got there, it was the lottery. Illinois had a lottery that was very successful. Indiana kept pushing. Larry Borst especially kept pushing for a lottery. And I think, I'm trying to remember if it was that bill finally passed after like 18 years. It finally passed, but I think I wasn't in the General Assembly when it did. But I think I may still have been in Indiana. I may have been right toward the end of my time as chair of the Utility Commission when that passed. But it eventually passed. But it took almost 20 years to get the lottery bill passed. And then I left and came over here, and all of a sudden the floodgates opened on gambling in Indiana. It's like, they resisted, and then the lottery bill passed, and then all of a sudden there's gambling everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, funny.
That was always the most controversial bill, and the whole time I was in there was the lottery. You could tell every year there was an effort made to pass the lottery bill. Every year it failed, but I was there.
Yeah. What was the most complex piece of legislation that you specifically worked on?
Well, I wasn't a major player in it.
Okay.
But I certainly had input into it, and that was the kind of reworking of the utility regulatory structure in Indiana that happened after Marble Hill.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that was really in the first few years that I was in the General Assembly. Marble Hill was a cataclysmic mess that really stained the entire utility industry and utility regulatory process. So the legislature, really kind of beginning my first year, and for a couple of years thereafter, worked on legislation, not just one bill, but a couple of pieces of legislation to restructure the utility regulatory system to make sure that something like Marble Hill didn't happen again. So it strengthened the hand of the Utility Regulatory Commission, strengthened the hand of the chairman, which actually leads directly to me because I wound up being the chairman.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And can you, for anyone who might listen to this in the future, can you talk about a little bit about Marble Hill and what happened?
Well, Public Service Indiana was the biggest utility in the state, covered 2/3 of the state geographically, and had at least a little bit more larger number of customers, I think, than the other utilities, the other investor-owned utilities. They decided they wanted to build a nuclear power plant. This was the decision was actually made, I think, in the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
They decided they wanted to build a nuclear power plant in southeastern Indiana it's called Marble Hill. It's over in the Lawrenceburg area, around in there, in that corner of the state. And they were going to build a nuclear power plant there. And, at that point in time, they had the cost estimates. They went to the commission. The commission kind of rubber stamped it without really giving it, at least the word was, the thought was that the commission didn't really exercise a lot of restraint in terms of authorizing the construction of this power plant. And then, so they started working on the power plant, started building it, and we're in the process of building it when 3 Mile Island nuclear accident happened in Pennsylvania. And, that basically skyrocketed the cost of building a nuclear power plant going forward, because nobody wanted to build a power plant that would have the problems that 3 Mile Island had.
Right.
So if the plant started out, the cost estimates that were originally approved were $1 billion to build this plant. The costs they kept going back and getting more approvals from the commission for higher costs and higher costs. You were getting up finally when they finally pulled the plug in 1981, 82. The costs had risen to something like $4 billion, and those costs had been more or less approved without much resistance by the Utility Regulatory Commission, and that's what set about the problem that the General Assembly thought necessitated restructuring the system to give the Utility Regulatory Commission more ability to refuse to do stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was, and so in the wake of that I came to the General Assembly just as that process of restructuring the utility regulatory system was beginning. So I was involved in that because, as I said, one of the reasons I went there was to represent my area, the coal area, and coal at that time was the 98% of the electricity generated in Indiana came from coal. So any utility issue, any electric utility issue was something that I was going to be interested and involved in because of my constituents.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense. Let's see, shifting gears a bit to some kind of big picture reflective questions. How would you summarize your time overall as a member of the General Assembly?
Well, I've told a few of my colleagues over here that I love my job over here. I loved it. Did for 27 years. But the best job I ever had, of all the jobs I've had, and I've had a whole list of jobs going all the way back to mowing lawns, working in a hospital as a kid, as a kitchen worker. All the jobs I've had in my entire life, including my one I've just finished after 27 years, my legislative job was my favorite. It was the best one I ever had.
Yeah, okay. Wow.
I loved it. I really did. I loved the whole thing. It was tough. It was tough because of the commute. It was tough because of the time involved. But it was still the best. It gave me the best feeling of any job that I ever had.
Yeah.
Because you could do so much to help people if you did that job the right way.
That's neat. Yeah, it's really cool. Let's see. You served for several years. Do you have any favorite stories from your time as legislator?
I think my favorite story is I told you about the conference committees, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure. I think it was not my last year, but one of my later years. They put me on the conference committee for the budget.
Right.
And you know how conference committees are set up there, or at least they were at that time. You have 2 senators and 2 House members.
Yep.
One from each party. So you have each caucus is represented on the conference committee. And you have to have 4 votes to sign the conference report, and the conference report then goes back to the 2 chambers to be approved. So they put me on the budget committee, put me on the budget conference committee, and I had a project that I wanted to be included in the budget. It was a new building at Ivy Tech over in Terre Haute.
Okay.
And they moved it badly. I mean, Ivy Tech in Terre Haute had just started maybe 10 years before, and the facilities were not good. They were older facilities that they kind of started the thing in, but they definitely needed a new classroom building and all that. And so they put me on the budget conference committee, but they didn't put that project in the budget. And I said to the leadership, I said, I'm willing to sign this report. The budget looks fine to me, except there's something I want in it. It has to be put in it that's not in it. And so they hemmed and hawed about it. That's the one time I kind of got crossways with the leadership.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, maybe the next time, maybe the next budget, but we can't get it in this budget. And I said, well, my problem is I won't sign the report without that in there. And they said, well, you have to. And I said, no, I don't. I said, I won't sign the report. And at that point in time, they couldn't. Well, I guess technically they could remove me, but they didn't really want to cause a furor,
right?
Because they knew that would cause a furor if they did. So they went back and forth, and they were kind of like not threatening me, but certainly they were playing hardball with me. And I said, I'm just not going to sign it. And so we adjourned for the day, and and they said, well, where can we reach you? And I said, well, I'm going home. And they said, home to Sullivan? Yeah, home to Sullivan. And they said, well, if we have to, we'll send the state police guy down with the report for you to sign. And I said, well, you can send the state police guy down if you want, but I'm not going to sign unless my building is in the budget. And it'll be a wasted trip. And so the state police guy didn't come. Then the next day they caved in and put my building in the budget. And so every time after that, when I went back and forth between Sullivan and Terre Haute, I got to look at my brand new building that I put in the budget.
Yeah, wow, okay. That's a pretty, that's a gutsy move to play, I guess, there.
Well, that's all I could do. I didn't have the votes to do anything.
Right, it's true.
They're the ones trusting me enough to put me on that committee.
Yeah.
So I figured this is something my district needs, and I'm going to hold out as long as I can to do it. And it worked.
Were you on a conference committee after that?
Not for a little while.
Okay.
I was on them, but not important. Not on the budget. They never put me on the budget again.
Yeah. But we came out of it okay. Garden was fine. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's one of the kind of unique things about so many aspects of the legislative process is that even like conference committee, you can just take something and put it in. But interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and it varies from state to state. Over here, they don't even use conference committees anymore. They used to.
Oh, okay.
But they don't even use conference committees anymore because the process is so tightly controlled by the leadership. It's not even necessary.
Yeah, no, I understand. Let's see. What lessons did you learn from your experiences in the General Assembly?
Well, I think the most important thing I learned was how to build a consensus, because I mean that serves you well in anything you do in life. I think whether it's political or not, trying to get a consensus behind a certain action or a position or whatever. And I kind of was able to do that before, but that's probably the biggest skill that I honed during my time in the legislature, was to be able to take something, a bill or an action or something, and build a consensus behind it to get it done, to get it put into play.
Yeah.
And that really, that skill alone served me extremely well as a lobbyist over here, because that's really what, over here anyway, and I think most places, that's really what a good lobbyist is able to do, is able to guide that consensus building process to the point where you're representing your client, you can get your client's goal approved.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense. Do you have any regrets from your time as a legislator?
No, I have no regrets at all. I really enjoyed it. I probably, I would have tried to stay in the legislature, except we had family illness. My wife had developed breast cancer.
Right.
And that's what happened. At the end of my second term, after Evan Bayh was elected, I let him know that I was not going to run for re-election. That I was going to go back home to Sullivan and practice law, maybe run for judge. Anyway, I was going to go back to Sullivan so that I could be there full time in Sullivan with my wife and family. And so that's when he, Bill Moreau and some of his folks said, "Well, listen, we're going to need a Democrat who knows utility issues to run this utility commission. Would you be interested in that?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd be interested in it." So that's how that all came about. So if I hadn't had that illness situation, I might have run for re-election for the third term and maybe stayed in the Senate longer.
Yeah. Okay. What was your proudest moment as a legislator?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I think maybe being sworn in the first time was pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, like I said before, it was something I really didn't have, never really planned for, but I thought it was pretty cool. I remember two moments in that Capitol building really pretty distinctly. The first one was when I came back from Florida and was sworn in as a member of the Indiana Bar in the Supreme Court chamber, and then the second one was swearing in as a state legislator for the first time.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Well, I should say, I guess I remember a third time in that building in the chapel when I got married.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
I better remember that.
Yeah, that's an important one. Yeah. What advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators?
Well, I guess the advice I would have for them, there's a bunch of stuff maybe, but the main advice I would have for them is work hard at it. Don't just slough off and let other people do. If you work hard at it, you'll be successful. If you don't work hard at it, you may get a few victories, but you're not going to have nearly the satisfying experience you have if you actually work hard at it, do the work, do what needs to be done to represent your constituents and get things accomplished.
Right. Yeah. True. What, in your opinion, is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, I mean, the most important, on a practical basis, the most important work of the General Assembly is to provide a budget for the state and live within that budget. But I think the General Assembly and the leadership of the General Assembly can set a tone for civility, which I think that's maybe not even possible anymore. But I think it was possible when I was there, and it was done when I was there. It was a political environment, it was a partisan environment, but it was a civil environment.
Yeah.
People got along. And that, I think that the General Assembly leadership can set a tone for the General Assembly, and the General Assembly can set a tone for the public at large along those lines. And that's another thing that I think is lacking currently, not only in state legislatures, but especially in Washington.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. What would you say the public does not know about the Indiana General Assembly and how it operates?
It's hard for me to say now.
Yeah.
But I think back then, what the public didn't really have a clue was how well we all got along together, even though we were Democrats and Republicans, even though we were in Indianapolis and the rest of the state. We were all different kind of people, but I think most readers of the Indianapolis Star and listeners to the TV stations didn't understand that it wasn't all about fighting. It was about working together collegially, and we did, for the most part, do that. But that kind of thing doesn't sell papers and doesn't get viewers.
Right. Yeah. Understand. Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Let's see. Last few questions. How has the state of Indiana changed over the course of your lifetime?
Oh wow, it's changed dramatically since I left Indiana in 1993. It was a Republican state politically, but there was a pretty good number of Democrats, and there was a little bit more collegiality between the two parties, and the public, I think, kind of reflected that. And I'm not over there now, but it seems to me like Indiana and many other states around the country, that's kind of been lost.
Yeah.
And everybody seems to be at each other's throats. Indiana politically, I know from watching the numbers, watching the elections, Indiana politically is 1,000 times more Republican now and more hard-right Republican now than it was when I was there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So that's changed. That's changed in just 30 years, not my whole 70-some years, but in just the last 30 years, that's changed dramatically. But it's not the only place. It's done that. That kind of change has taken place all over the country, really.
Right. Yeah. It seems like it.
And it didn't start 6 years ago. It started 20 years ago. Actually, 22 plus 6, 28 years ago. The first election I was over here in Illinois was 1994, and that election, I think, was the start of all this drifting into this partisan divide that we're in.
Yeah. How have the people of Indiana changed?
I think the people of Indiana are basically still good, solid, down-home people. I would hate to think that has changed.
Right.
But you do have some elements there that are pretty radical.
Yeah.
When it comes to this partisan divide thing.
Sure. Let's see. Last question. What do you want the people of Indiana to know about their influence on the General Assembly?
Well, I think it would be something they should know that they can. I mean, I think a lot of people out in the general public think they have no influence on the General Assembly.
Right.
But they do. They got to vote. They got to be actively involved in current affairs and know what's going on. But I think they need to make their voices heard. That's one of the things I used to love about the Saturday morning town halls that we did. Was that was it. I mean, people were giving you their opinions in real time on what you were dealing with in the General Assembly. And I think more of that needs to happen. More input from the general public to their elected leaders would be a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask about that you want to mention, or?
No, I think that covered it really well. I appreciate the questions.
All right, perfect. Well, yeah, thanks for doing this. This is really fun. I appreciate it.
I look forward to it. Thank you.